Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they give to their younger selves. Jordan Lane is the Chief Scientific Officer of Ignota Labs, a company leveraging AI to rescue failed drug programs. Jordan joined us to talk about building conviction, seeking feedback, and maintaining networks, the huge opportunity lying in failed research, and why risk is relative in your career. Well, I'm back on Careers in Discovery with Jordan Lane of Ignota Labs. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, no, great to see you. And I'm really excited to talk about your career. I think you've worked for some fascinating companies, including Ignota, the company that you're part of now. I'm really interested to start by talking about the work you're doing there, because I think, going back a few years, everyone was talking about applying AI to drug development in a very broad sense. What really struck me as we talked about Ignota last time we spoke was that you've identified what I think is a really unique use case for it, and a very specific, but also a very specific niche that you can really leverage. So I'd really love to hear more about it.
Yeah, of course. I think that the vast majority of people in drug discovery heavily focus on efficacy, because that is the major driver for people wanting to get a drug into a patient. And I've definitely been there during my career. Mm-hmm. And that means that when people have used AI, they've gone for efficacy problems first.
Right.
And AI is not new anymore, specifically in drug discovery. But one of the aspects that is typically overlooked is safety. And if you look into the numbers, between kind of preclinical and phase 3, 56% of drugs are still failing because of safety.
Right.
Phase 1 being the kind of major hurdle, where over 80% are because of safety. It's obviously the major safety hurdle, but many within preclinical animal models are stopped because of safety. And typical clinical readouts don't give you a why. They just say, well, a mouse has died, your patient's got raised liver enzymes, and you go, well, it's gone through all of the regulatory barrage, I've done the best I can, and right. You leave it there. So what we set out to do at Ignota Labs is build on some really exciting and interesting tech coming out of the University of Cambridge with my co-founder, Leila Hosseini-Garami, to build on that and understand the causal mechanism for those safety failures and get down to a root cause within the chemistry, within the moleculars of what that is binding on an off-target, what that off-target then kind of pathway goes through to result in that toxicity. So we can then get to not only was that drug good, but is it now salvageable once it's hit that safety right. issue, working with people to turn around their drugs or taking those drugs off them, developing them ourselves and kind of capturing the value that way.
Yeah, I see. So this is a key contributor to why most drug programs fail, right? And as you say, most people focusing on efficacy. Do you think that's because the safety aspect of it is less well understood? Do you think that's why it's been less popular?
I think it's less sexy as a general argument. I think there's multiple different pathways that can result in safety issues. And for the FDA or any regulatory body to mandate a test, it has to have a very high burden and a very high percentage of drugs failing because of that. The vast majority of drugs fail because of idiosyncratic tox, where right. It doesn't need to be idiosyncratic. You can figure it out, especially with the help of AI. But to test everything under the sun, it would cost millions and millions and millions to fully de-risk the safety program.
Right. And that would be spent on what is currently being seen as a failed program, right? And so,
exactly.
Yeah, difficult one to sell if you haven't got the right direction there, I guess. And so am I right in thinking that you've done some partnering work with the platform, but you're also looking at, doing some of this safety work yourself and taking assets forward and working in that way too?
Yeah, so we really help companies who have deprioritized
Hmm.
projects because of safety. Either work with them if they believe in the target and they've got capital to turn it around, or if they don't and it's going to sit on the shelf of what otherwise is a very promising drug that could fundamentally help patients, we in-license those, and we've just in-licensed our first one, where we then take that development on ourselves. We look to put it through the standard IND enabling tox once we've fixed the kind of causal issue around the safety program and into a phase one, and then we'll look to out-license it at that point.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. And I'm always interested in the origins of companies. And we'll talk about your career a bit more, Jordan, as well. But you've seen quite a broad spectrum of the pharmaceutical industry. You've worked at a CRO, you've worked at a big pharma company, you've got into a couple of the sort of, leading players in AI as applied to drug development, drug discovery in the UK, and then founded this company. Tell me about the origins of the idea, how the company came to be, and where it all started from.
Yeah, so my career developed into more of a project leadership
Hmm.
position, and I was lucky to lead projects from a big pharma perspective, from a kind of AI drug discovery perspective. And one of the hurdles that I had seen across pipelines and portfolios was the things being dropped
Right.
for no good reason, and lots of millions of pounds of R&D expenditure sat on the shelf that could otherwise be helping people. So that really lit the fire of how do we help that. And
Yes.
then working with my other co-founder, Sam Windsor, he was doing his MBA in INSEAD, and I started speaking to him about like, what can we do to help this? And it
Mm-hmm.
very quickly focused on safety being that major kind of issue. And then how do we tackle safety in a new way led us to Layla and her work at University of Cambridge to identify that specific tool within safety, giving us that edge to tackle it as a three.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so this is a problem that you had sort of observed yourself from the other side of the fence and looked for a solution for.
Yeah.
Um, and this may be a very difficult question to answer, and there may not be a clear answer for it. But of that 56% then of drugs that fail due to safety issues, do you have an estimate as to sort of what proportion of those are salvageable?
It's a good question. It's a question that we are kind of working through at the
Sure.
moment.
Yeah.
There's over 1,000 phase one clinical trials each year that essentially
Hmm.
don't report back within a time frame that you would expect them to report back in, which is our proxy for they've hit one problem or another.
Yeah.
We believe it's the majority of those that
Okay.
can get to an explainable reason, and that explainable reason could be on target, it could be off target, and then we go through a host of different filters for whether it's a project for us. So whether it's in a market that's got a good upsell potential at the end of it, the toxicity itself, as we can understand it from chemical structure alone, is a good kind of first point, but would then like to get deeper into the information that they have to really work in that partnership, because we look at turning losing situations for the company into win-win situations for both us and them.
Yes.
So we're hoping to kind of strike collaborative deals across the industry. And the tech so far has been mightily impressive in
Mm.
understanding problems from novel standpoints, but also fixing historic issues. So we've just got the first mechanistic understanding of gefitinib's drug-induced liver injury causes,
Right.
which has eluded the industry for 20 years. And using our AI, we got to the causal understanding of that. So if it can solve that problem, we believe it can solve many, many other problems going forwards.
Yeah, so we're not talking about the odd program here and there. We're talking about probably hundreds a year of programs that could be saved if the desire is there and if the intention is there.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And the company you've been building the company now for, I guess, just over a year and a half. Where are you up to with it? What's going on today?
Yeah, so we're now a team of 7 people, mixture of
Hmm.
full-time and some interns. We've got a phenomenal scientific advisory board and phenomenal advisors. that have really helped us craft not only the company, but the business strategy and make sure that we are fulfilling the niche both within the scientific function, but how we are going to market with that, I think is really innovative and novel.
Mm.
We are outraising our seed round at the moment. So it's going very well. Fundraising is always a enjoyable but challenging time of the company because it's one of the kind of clear nexus points of whether we'll be able to survive for several years going forwards and grow, or whether that's the end. I believe our platform, the proof points we've got from our platform are now so compelling that we should fly through the seed round coming up. We've got lots of deeper conversations with many interested parties now.
No, I'm sure. And as I said at the beginning, it's quite a unique proposition from what I can see. And I think that always, but it, very logical one. Yeah, I think people will understand it, especially if they're connected to the industry. So, it's good luck with the raise, but I can see the case for it for sure.
Yeah, and then over the next couple of years, that will give us the capital to really develop the pipeline, bring in 4 different assets under our management, and push those forwards. So we're very excited about our future plans.
Fantastic. So from the future, we'll go to the past. Tell us about I guess the roots of this career for you. Why science in the first place? Why drug development? Why this path for you?
Yeah, so I was good at science as a child at school, fundamentally, but I was first to university from not only my kind of immediate family, but all of my extended family and friends of family and everything else. Like, I had some phenomenal parents who were very supportive, but within the academic sphere, my mum was a nurse, my dad was a lorry driver, and he kind of worked his way up within the business to become managing director. So very strong work ethics, but no role models within kind of professional careers, I suppose. So my initial one was, or if I like science, my mum's a nurse, I will be a doctor. So applied to medicine, but didn't have that support network to understand what an application into medicine actually meant, and having to jump through all of the various hoops. So I didn't get an offer for medicine, but I got a host of different offers from different universities for a range of science careers.
Yes.
And Nottingham gave me a list of 12 and said, pick one. And that was really empowering because it kind of gave me some choice back at a time where I felt like there wasn't that many options, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I chose biochemistry and genetics because I think it was a kind of a broad background into science, and never looked back. As soon as I sat down in my first lecture and they said, this is how a drug works, and this is why it works within the cell. And if you don't understand this, you'll never be able to make new drugs. And all doctors can do is essentially give patients drugs that have been made. Without science, there would be no more drugs. People would never get any better than they are now. So I was very much hooked, not only in science, but in drug discovery and wanting to work on human disease, I suppose.
Yeah, I see. So that opportunity to have that broader impact was there from, they made that very clear from very early on, it sounds like.
Yeah, and then that led me to a PhD in Alzheimer's disease, which was interesting. Enjoyed my kind of time during my PhD, but it also introduced the complexities of academic life. My supervisor was looking for different grants. Even if the project that I was on was fully funded throughout all of it, which it turned out not to be, it still would have been a decade, maybe 2 decades away from actually making patient impact. So at the end of my PhD, I still wanted to be closer to the patients and more impactful, which is where the drug discovery industry really intersects. It goes in a patient once it leaves your hands. And that was the kind of point where drug discovery was for me, and that's where I wanted to go.
Makes sense. And you found your way to Signature Discovery. And I know they're very well connected to Nottingham and the ecosystem there. So tell us a bit about that move.
Yeah, so Signature was a fantastic move. It was when I joined, they've now gone mad with all of the investment they've had and
Yes.
expanded dramatically. But the project that I was brought in for was essentially a virtual biotech, and they used Signature as a small pharma company.
Okay.
So there were only 3 biologists, 2 kind of in the wet lab, a team of chemists, and it was literally week by week, the chemists would hand you the compound they've just made. I would then run all of the biochemistry, biochem cell work. Once the project developed into treating mice, we got the tumors back, and we were looking at the RNA qPCR of that.
Yes.
So it was very much end-to-end drug discovery in a very small environment where I had lots of ownership. I sat on the chemistry design meetings, and the chemist even humored me and made some of the drugs that I had designed to try and displace some waters in a pocket. But that end-to-end experience, becoming a kind of jack of all trades within drug discovery, was, I think, vital for where my career ended up, of becoming more of a kind of project leader and thinking about the project more holistically. Signature is a great proving ground for young scientists.
Yeah, and I think there's sometimes a sort of resistance to CROs that we see from scientists in terms of their career choices, but actually I think often moving to a CRO gives you a breadth of exposure that you don't get necessarily working in a biotech company, to different types of techniques, different types of tools, different people from different backgrounds, because I suppose especially the ones that go on to become slightly larger, they have to have such a vast array of skills and knowledge in the business to be sustainable, right? It's unusual to get that breadth of expertise in one place.
Yeah, I think I was lucky to be at a size where it was very much an FTE, and I did what the project needed. Whereas now they are, I think, more specialists on, you can be biophysics and you will just run the SPR and that will be your life. But that's the same in big pharma. So when I moved to AstraZeneca, Signature was very much set up from ex-AstraZeneca people at the Charnwood site. So it was very much going to the mothership to see how it was done in big pharma. But I went from doing a bit of everything across the drug discovery spectrum to doing one aspect of, I was developing assays, and that was it. And once that assay was developed, it was then handed off into the high throughput screening team, or it was handed off into the mechanistic team that would run it week by week. And the depth of experience within AstraZeneca was phenomenal. Like being around people who had spent 20, 30 years in assay development, enzymologists, cell experts, and kind of learning from those peers was phenomenal.
Yes.
But I felt somewhat constrained within that box. My supervisor, both supervisors at Signature and AstraZeneca, were phenomenal, of really giving me opportunities to grow and expand. And I seconded into the high throughput screening team to run a screen at AstraZeneca, and then seconded into the mechanistic team and was out in Boston for a bit, like hand transferring assays. So that was me kind of raging against the pigeonholing, which helped kind of accelerate my career within AstraZeneca. And I wanted to pick up project leadership roles as quickly as possible to get that breadth back. And I think that's what was then more addictive, of, I'm now helping lead a project where I've got 12 different people with a variety of skill sets, discrete skill sets, coming together on that project scale. And found that very addictive to help projects get through discovery and kind of into the clinic. So I've now got three projects from Signature and AstraZeneca that I have a solid amount of ownership for, that are now in kind of phase 2, I suppose.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's good. And I guess there is always that dichotomy, I suppose, in big pharma companies between, as you say, in your role itself, you can be quite pigeonholed, or quite focused in what you're doing. But then there are this vast range of opportunities within the broader company to do other things. I mean, did you were they very proactive with you around taking those opportunities, or were you driving those moves, or what was the sort of the balance there?
I think it was a balance. I
Yeah,
think with the right manager and the right mindset, you can push. And once you start pushing, you are seen as somebody who wants to push, and therefore they
right.
help you. So it's a kind of it's a bit of both. Like I said, I was very lucky to have a very proactive manager that was happy to fight my corner and happy to kind of throw me in at the deep end.
Yes.
I like to think that I rewarded that by swimming, because I think if you're chucked into the deep end and you sink and you drag them down with you, it looks bad. But I was lucky enough to take the opportunities and run with them, which meant I was afforded more opportunities and had interns, had different studentships, was working with different groups on kind of novel ideas. So I'd built up quite a little portfolio of people that I was working with on
Yes.
different projects at my time at AZ.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then 2020 came around, and 2020 was a funny old year for everybody. I think you had perhaps more change than some during that year, because you left the mothership, as you say, and obviously, everyone will be aware listening to this, one of the largest, not just pharmaceutical companies, but one of the largest companies in the world, to join a sort of, I guess they wouldn't have been a startup then, but still a pretty scrappy early stage company in Lab Genius.
Yeah, so I was always commuting from London to Cambridge
Right.
for my time at AstraZeneca, which was a long commute, but I always felt that the job was worth it to kind of keep that motivation going. During lockdown, during COVID, what does a wet lab scientist do when not having a wet lab? And going back when the world did open back up, it opened up quite constrained.
Yes.
It was very much like, go in, do your lab work, go home. And it was like, I have a 4-hour commute. That's not really possible.
Right.
And Lab Genius offered both the increase in life. It was a 15-minute cycle away, which was lovely.
Right. Yeah.
But it also offered, and I think more critically, an opportunity to use all of those skills and experience that I'd garnered from Signature and AstraZeneca and take that experience into a smaller company that is doing something really innovative and new. And I could go in and kind of carve out more of a niche for myself. So I joined Lab Genius as a group leader,
Yes.
immediately got to hire a couple of fantastic people within that group. And it was like matrix management, but it meant I had quite good oversight and support across different people within the organization. I helped kind of go through a slight structural rearrangement, so more focused within project delivery. And I ended up co-leading one of the collaborations with a pharma partner that they had at the time. So yeah, very much enjoyed that change of environment into a much more collaborative, much more kind of using all of the skills that you had built up over that time.
Yeah, and it let you, from the sounds of it, sort of lean into this interest that you had in greater breadth in what you were doing. And so why was that attractive to you, getting into that project leadership side of things? Some people like to go deeper and deeper into a specific thing, and some people like to develop breadth. And I think there's room for both approaches. But why the project leadership side for you, do you think?
I think it facilitated the depth of kind of moving projects forwards and kind of having that impact of getting it to where it needs to be, but also allowing deep diving into each specific area to make sure that that was tracking along that overall goal, I suppose. And within project leadership, everything has to be working along the different chains of the journey.
Yes.
If one chain is broken, the whole thing falls down. If you haven't looked at one aspect of your drug, so say it's not metabolically stable, for example, that will derail the whole project. So although it's been gaining breadth, like my background has kind of given me enough depth within each pillar that you can kind of put the cross piece on top.
Yeah, I see. And there's still a bit of your career we haven't talked about yet, but looking at those different environments you found yourself in, from the CRO to the big pharma to the biotech company, and the tech-driven biotech company particularly. What, on reflection, what are your observations about those different environments, and your suitability for each of them, but also the kinds of people that you saw in those environments that they seem to be very suited for? Because I think all of them valid ways to build a career, but they tend to suit different people differently, I think.
Yeah, I think I might be a typical millennial, of reading some of the things, of moving every 3 years to kind of diagonally jump through my career. And I've seen that from the people who kind of joined at the same time as me at Signature. I've now got a broad network of emerging leaders across the industry. AstraZeneca was more of a typical, like, there are some real lifers within AstraZeneca, of people that have been at the company for 30 years, and the depth of experience that they have, not only from being in one kind of research focus for that amount of time, but also their historical knowledge of, oh, we did that 15 years ago and it worked for this reason, it didn't work for that reason. And having that was very eye-opening. Moving into the AI side of things, and the differences between kind of Lab Genius and Benevolent, was Lab Genius was very vision forward, kind of new lot. It was a very young company at the time I joined. Very lots of enthusiasm and excitement, which was fantastic to join that environment and kind of like go through that journey. Benevolent AI was more ex-big pharma people who were they'd taken that wealth of knowledge and they were applying it into this new exciting world. So very much enjoyed seeing both sides of those coins and trying to balance them at Ignota Labs, I suppose.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, really, is that I suppose, going on this journey now with Ignota, where you're in a senior executive position, you're one of the founders of the company. There's an opportunity, I suppose, to replicate the things that you liked and also do things differently in the areas that you think they should be done differently. Are there particular things that stick out to you through your prior career that have been, I guess, key principles for you going into building this company?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost has been building out a phenomenal network of scientists that, although I back myself, having people to constantly challenge our thinking across the whole company has been vital. And as I said, not coming from a background of having that network, building that network up over time, of working with people, different people in the industry, constantly building bridges from each place that I moved on from. I've just left behind a phenomenal network that I've been able to tap into. So leaving Benevolent, Anne Phelan then joined on our scientific advisory board as a CSO. I've got advisors from AstraZeneca, who I still keep in touch with on a kind of monthly basis to give oversight. Layla's brought lots from her previous experience from the AI side. Sam's brought experience from his on the business side. And together we've collated lots of people who throw stones at us as hard as possible. And we actively invite that internally, because it means that as a company, when we then go externally, we're never going to face something that somebody hasn't already said, have you thought about that? And then we've got an answer for it, or we've gone out and done it. So I think that's been the biggest, most impactful thing, of making sure that we are constantly challenged by the brightest minds across the industry. And we're lucky that people have been so generous with their time with us and come along on that journey.
Yeah, and I have looked at your advisory board, and it's a pretty impressive group, I must say. And there's always... So obviously you've been progressing through your career pretty steadily, increasing levels of responsibility and, certainly forward movement. There's always an element of risk in pulling the trigger and going and doing your own thing. Obviously you'd identified this problem. You'd been talking about how to solve it. Do you remember what the point was where either you individually or you guys collectively said, do you know what, there's something here, we should do this?
Risk I always saw it as a relative thing. And I always
Yeah.
had this thing in my mind about track A life and track B life. And
Okay.
track A life, as you said, was progressing relatively rapidly through organizations. I could see myself staying at AstraZeneca, even like taking that leap to Lab Genius. If I'd stayed at AstraZeneca and I have teammates there who are doing very well, that would be a very structured life. You'd
Yes.
end up on a good wage. But taking the jump into Lab Genius, I was like, well, if it all goes wrong, I know I could probably go back to AstraZeneca because I've not burnt any bridges. I've built up a good reputation. And that was the same as when I was at Benevolent. I was like, well, if I take this leap and it all goes wrong, I can go back to Benevolent or I can go back to AstraZeneca. Like, it's never going to be a bad set of experience to go out, have to deal with all of the other aspects of running a company,
Yes.
take that kind of step forward, show that you can kind of do it and stand on your own feet, build a team, build that line management, all of the various aspects of becoming with a founder. It's a complete mad life. And even if it all does end tomorrow, the skills and experience I would have built up in that time, I wouldn't have been able to get anywhere else.
No,
so
absolutely.
It makes me, I think, an even better candidate to go back into the industry. I'm not sure if I ever could now. I've had the taste of running a company and being
Yes.
in charge and a part of all of the decision making. But yeah, that's the relative risk, I suppose.
Yeah, so you've found you've been able to keep your perspective on what the real level of risk is, because I think some people find that difficult, right? They sort of think, well, if I do this and it never works, I'll never. They may not think this consciously, but they subconsciously think I'll never get a job again, and I'll be on the streets, and my family will be starving. They immediately go to disaster. But yeah, I think you're right. I think especially big companies, they're desperate for people with entrepreneurial mindsets and resourcefulness and all this kind of stuff. And as you say, the other question is whether you could ever actually bring yourself back into that environment, because it is different. But yeah, I think keeping that perspective is really key. And then, so you've touched on this then just now, but there is then a leap to take into a chief scientific officer position. And, of course, in an early company, you're still very hands-on and you're very close to things. And in terms of the sort of, probably 50-60% of the day-to-day work remains similar, but there's then this extra level of responsibility, these other activities that you're involved in terms of decision-making, strategy, external communication, those sorts of things. How did you find that transition? And was there anything that you did that you think really helped you to make that move successfully?
Not really. It's all it's not a very good answer. But it has all come somewhat naturally. I think it's been a change of mindset of, instead of building network, utilizing the network and actively calling in favors. I suppose there was a period of awkwardness going through that, of like, oh, can I really send an email to someone asking for help and asking for their time and being able to give them very little in return? But as I said, once you get through over that hurdle and you realize that people are trying to help and just being the nice people you know them to be, that just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. So your confidence of being able to stand up in a room and talk about your company, it's a bit like your thesis defense of, it the best that anyone else knows it in the world. Right. Therefore, all you've got to do is try to convey that message to other people. Yeah. The advice I'd give for people is, get over that hurdle, ask people for help, put yourselves in their shoes of, if you had this relationship with them and they came to you and said, hi, do you mind if you can give me an hour a month to talk through something? Would you likely do it? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is, well, of course, yes. And it's like, that's,
Yeah, and I've found it on this podcast as well. It's always amazing, particularly in the biotech sector, how willing people are to help, and how willing people who you would look at as very important people, or people doing high level roles, or that you'd imagine are too busy to even consider it want to help, and they want to give back, and they got help when they were coming up, and they want to return the favor. And I think it is a very supportive industry, but you have to go out and ask, as you say.
Yeah. And I think within drug discovery specifically, lots of people view each other, well, from the business side, they're viewed as competitors. However, drug discovery is so big, so complex, and I see it as almost fractal. Like once you get one layer of complexity down, there's another layer of complexity within that. That it's rare that there are actually that many true competitors. They're more likely collaborators in an adjacent space that you can work with. You can do joint ventures, you can put grants in together, you can find ways to kind of work together that bolsters both of you instead of trying to do everything yourself.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, there's so much complexity that working on the same thing is almost impossible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of making that transition, then, what have been, whether it's in terms of stepping into that C-level position or in terms of just starting a business, what have been the things that have happened that you didn't expect? What have been the curveballs that have come your way so far, do you think?
I think so I've also picked up a lot of the ops roles within the company. We don't have a formal COO yet, so I've kind of taken on a lot of the line management, setting up people's personal development plans, taking on a role of hiring and firing to a level that I hadn't had to do before because I've always had HR support and the rest of it.
Yes.
And I think fundamentally everything is down to a personal relationship. So that has come relatively easy. But it's easy when it's easy and it's hard when it's hard. And I think it's the hard when it's hard challenge that was new to me. And again, luckily we managed to get some support during that time and speak to the right people to be like, nope, you're doing everything right, just you have to now go and do it. Was a challenge. The other aspect, I suppose, is working within venture capital and realizing that it's person to person again. Like, although these people deal with large amounts of money, there is quite a lot of personal interest drives things a very long way. Yes. They also have a completely different rule book that they won't tell you or show you what's going on behind closed doors. Interestingly, the closer we've got to some VCs, they've let us behind the curtain, have been like, we don't actually have any money to deploy, but we've still got to be out there getting deal flow, because when the money does come in, we then need to have those deals and understand it. But it's a no, but it's not a no because we don't like you. It's not a no because your company's not good enough. It's a no because we don't have the money, but we can never tell you that. And there's so many different stories around what investors are looking for, how their fit is, and the scorecard that you're being marked on is completely different between each one. And us just having conviction that we are doing the right thing, we are in the marketplace essentially by ourselves. Like, there is no other competitor that I know of that is looking at safety turnaround. So I think we're unique within that, and our tech stack is specialized and focused beyond that of other AI companies to exploit that in the best way possible. So we just have to build up that internal conviction and keep going and keep speaking to people, because you will find the lock that fits your key, or the other way around, to then move on to the next stage.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think it's one of the things that people most commonly underestimate or undervalue about their first step into being an entrepreneur is how much you'll miss having feedback from a boss to tell you that you're doing the right thing, or tell you that you're not doing the right thing, or, course correct and things like that. Because the amount of, I guess probably between the three of you, you do a bit of this for each other, but the amount of sort of questioning and self-doubt you can go through if you don't get that feedback is huge. And I think people don't realize how difficult it is to not have that direction at times.
Yeah, and it once you get external direction, it's the balance of, do you believe it or not? Because
Yeah,
again, that person has their bias and their kind of view of the world. And we've had two expert advisors give completely conflicting information
absolutely. Yeah,
from 1 hour to the next. And you
yeah,
then have to sit there and go, right, there is no right answer because these two people have just given two right answers, but they're
yes,
completely opposite from one another. What do we actually, as I say, that internal conviction, what do we believe in, and what path are we going down? And therefore then explaining it to advisor B, just being like, we appreciate your advice, but we're going in this direction because we believe these other things that you don't rate highly, we do rate highly, etc.
yes. I saw an interview with Jeff Bezos once, and he talked about feedback and kind of managing himself around feedback because, there's all this advice to get as much feedback as possible, but he was talking about essentially the same thing. What do you do when you don't really agree with the feedback or the feedback's conflicting or that kind of thing? And he just said basically he goes and looks in the mirror and asks himself, are they right? And if he doesn't think they're right, he moves on and forgets about it. And if he does think they're right, then he goes and acts on it. But there's that, yeah, you've got to develop that internal compass, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you said, as a founding three and as a wider team, having that sounding board, having where are our internal drivers? Like, what's the most important thing for you? And I think we realized as a founding team, building a company that turns around assets is fundamentally more motivating than building like a software platform that the technology could have bent itself to in a different direction, different life. And it was like, where are our motivations? And it's just like to get better drugs to patients. And it's just like, and how do we believe the best way to do that is that a software solution where we facilitate others, or is that us developing something deeper that we utilize ourselves?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think following your passion on that is so critical. So looking back on your career to date, Jordan, what are the things, or what is maybe one thing that you know now that you wish you'd known then? Or if you bumped into yourself on the way into Signature Discovery on your first day, or maybe finishing up your PhD, that you'd give yourself as a piece of advice?
I don't think I actively knew it back then, but two kind of major ones. First one is build bridges. And I did it naturally, but building bridges throughout your career is, I think, the most important thing you can do. Like that network effects of when people at AstraZeneca, when people then move to different companies, you've then got networks into those companies. And when they then move, and at Benevolent, when people have moved on, you build up this phenomenal network of people that you can trust and rely on because you've worked with them kind of face to face. So constantly building bridges is one of them. And then the second one, which came from my line manager at Benevolent, which is very much the devil is always in the detail. Within drug discovery, it is always the kind of level down of understanding where the true innovation lies.
Right.
And that's what we aim for our mechanistic understanding from the kind of knowledge graph and the causal AI that we're building in-house. But also whenever we evaluate any piece of science, getting down into that detail and really understanding it is the most important part.
And so I suppose the challenge for you ahead will be maintaining that as the business grows, right? And maintaining that visibility.
Yeah, and it's going to be making sure that we've hired phenomenal people so far. We've got a good network of people, but making sure that quality and that intensity of challenge and overview is maintained at all levels of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's an incredibly exciting time. As I said this earlier in the podcast, but I do genuinely think you have a really unique proposition and the impact is clear. We have our fingers crossed for you, Jordan, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs and insight, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium or TikTok. I'll see you next time.